Okay, so thanks for joining us today. My name is Mike Zephyr, and I'm an associate professor here at the University of Melbourne in the Faculty of Business and Economics. And this is the Quantitative Methods Network at the University of Melbourne, or QMNET, which is started out as kind of an informal, internal University of Melbourne group of people who are interested in quantitative research and I guess numbers more generally, and has now grown. We've got international speakers, and today we're extremely pleased to welcome Theodore Porter from UCLA, the Distinguished Professor of History from UCLA, and he's here to talk about us talk with us about funny numbers. So the title of his talk is Funny Numbers Toward a Political Economy of Data and Information. And if I could just give some, just a brief bit of information about Ted. Ted is a professor specializing in the history of science. He's authored several books on the topic, including The Rise of Statistical Thinking from 1820 to 1900, which was a huge influence on me and my thinking, as well as his book, Trust in Numbers, The Pursuit of Objectivity in Science and Public Life. He's also done substantial work on Carl Pearson. And he's got another book, Genetics in the Madhouse, The Unknown History of Human Heredity. He's also co-edited a book on the history of the social sciences titled The Modern Social Sciences. And his work on the history of statistics and numerical practices, particularly trust in numbers, is widely considered to be groundbreaking and has been noted as the closest one can get to a universal reference for a sociology of quantification. Professor Porter graduated from Stanford University with an AB in history in 1976 and earned a PhD from Princeton in 81. And in 2008, Ted, you were elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And we are just so pleased to have you. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, and feel free to take it away. Thanks.
Good. Well, thanks, Michael. And it's nice to be here. And though I'm, as I mentioned in the talk before, I'm not very experienced with talking on Zoom, so I'm being kind of conservative. I thought I'd begin, I'm going to make my way through some things that I've done related to this, to the, well, a little trust in numbers perhaps, and certainly some funny numbers, which I will explain along the way. But I thought I'd say a little about kind of a background to these things, and especially the history of statistics, which you, Michael, very kindly mentioned. But that book, by the way, and Trust in Numbers have been reissued by Princeton University Press, like in the last month, with a new preface. So I went back and looked at them and scratched my head, especially the first one, which always, 35 years ago, and it's a little hard to imagine, that book as my book now. But I guess Trust in Numbers I haven't really forgotten. So. Anyhow, so I've just we can kind of begin by thinking a little bit about history of statistics. And I said something. Well, I guess a graduate student came in and found that in my first book I identified the kind of beginning of this field in the around 1820. That's the first date of my first book. Well, she had found things from the 1770s that looked pretty convincing. So we have to say, actually, that there is no beginning of a thing like this. For my purposes, the early 19th century was convenient, and it was convenient because that was what I wrote about. And some things happened. It was a real expansion of state and institutional statistics gathering, and new problems people were worried about and trying to address using those numbers. But I like starting. As a person who's worked on topics involving statistics in some way for most of my career, I liked the early 19th century because on the one hand, the state statistics were getting going, but it's still very much or statistics was still identified with with the etymology of this term, which is of course the state, as in the political state. There's a moment when Germans wondered if it was about state as in the state of like, what's happened, what's going on now, but it clearly was about, it was a practical state science, among other doing, what is still being done with statistics a little bit as a basis of, kind of vicarious experience. You can't be there all the time, so you use the numbers. They're imperfect, but they provide information you don't have otherwise, and function, for making accounts and things as well. In any case, this, from if you look up in the, at least the Library of Congress card catalog, there are two numbers for statistics, and one is mathematical statistics, and one is like census statistics. One is a social science, one is a mathematical science. In fact, they run together. Sometimes they're not the same thing, but sometimes they overlap. And my first two books were, one of them was in one of those categories, as the library cataloger decided, and one was in the other. The kind of number gathering has always been crucial to statistics. Actually, I'm not so sure about. I'm going to say that in the Anglophone world, but maybe and probably including Australia, but I don't actually know. Well, R.A. Fisher was in Australia for a long time, so certainly the mathematical side had its had its day, and has been important. The more census side in perhaps non-English language countries remains more often identified, not just with statistics at all. Every country has that, but with university, the kind of statistics that's taught in universities. And then, yeah, it turns out that it has dispersed. Here we are. I gather from the way you introduced this talk, Michael, that you have people from different fields, and that's because people from different fields are using statistics, and it looks like the same thing at first. And then you realize that it's, in fact, each, even if they're doing, analysis of variance or something, or whatever, the mathematical analysis, every discipline has its own ways of doing it. They're not sure whether they want to study statistics with the statistics, department, or whether they're better off learning, economics. Certainly, economics is econometrics is a distinct kind of field, and psychology is very important, and has its own techniques, and on it goes. So, a whole range of things. I move on to thinking a little about trust in numbers, which has the misleading impression that that I think that people automatically trust numbers or something, and I think that's probably not true. That suspicion of numbers is as common as trust in numbers, and I argue, at least in that old book, that trust in numbers, that reliance on numbers is often associated with distrust rather than with trust. That the trust comes from supposing that analyzing numbers is a well-specified set of procedures, or perhaps something quite technical, or at least, or maybe if it's not difficult and technical, maybe it's simple, like like arithmetic. And so there isn't really. So you can rely on the numbers, maybe even if you don't have much confidence in the people who have produced them, if you suppose the numbers are sufficiently constraining, or maybe at least it forces a division between total dishonesty and rigorously following what the numbers allow. But I wrote about trust in numbers. I wrote about the numbers, or this kind of faith arising in situations where there were unavoidable conflicts that could not be settled, and in which they looked to increasingly specific specification of the calculations in order to provide something, when they couldn't get any agreement about how to divide up, well, let's say how to divide up work between different institutions that were engaged in water management, for example. In the sciences, certainly one way that that Fisher's statistics or the mathematical kinds of statistics functions is to provide a kind of license that the rules have been followed, and so that this is an honest result and not something that has been and not something that has been made up by somebody who wanted to have that result, provided of course that the analysis was carried out fairly. And well, this is something I'm going to return to, but even in that example already, the numbers that are, so the numerical analysis that is supposed to be sufficiently rigorous that people can't cheat is in fact it's surrounded by scandalous cheating. I don't, not always everywhere, but I mean, there are great scandals associated, let's say, especially I would say with medical statistics and with social psychology, perhaps, where if you can get the p-value down to 0.05, then you're golden, and and there are ways, a whole set of ways of redesigning the experiment to do that, and then new actions coming in to try to constrain those efforts so that the numbers will have to be honest after all, and then new discoveries of tricks to avoid and so on. Well, just to move from statistics, I mean, I began on history of statistics looking at the collectives of statistics, the numbers that were produced and how they were analyzed. But there's another approach, another kind of focus, which is getting more and more attention, and which I kind of found myself doing before I decided doing it, which is looking at not at, first of all, at the level of the statistics, but at the level of data, or you might just say even datum, the production of these numbers, at the ground level. And at the ground level, it's a fascinating, more interesting than people think until they look at it a little bit. And again, it's not so much dictated by the rules as you think, and there's always possibilities of cheating, though certainly efforts to constrain it, and misused rules. These things can be quite controversial, and in my sad state, I don't mean California, I mean the United States, great efforts again to corrupt the statistics or to cancel them, or to avoid making up for missing data if the missing data is coming from a place where you don't want the data coming from. So the level of producing the data is, it sounds easy, it sounds like counting, but even counting, a few hundred things can be difficult, and counting with 240, 340 million things, or whatever, 40 million things is, it involves lots of difficulties, and produces actually quite fascinating stories, in which there's there's by now considerable literature on all kinds of statistical analysis. I won't go on about this since it's not really my topic, but I'm sure you all know that that the idea of algorithms as something automatic, and so it can't really be corrupt, has led to terrible abuses of counts, to in ways that ascribe greater crime rates or whatever to people who actually produce these differences rather than really measuring them. And I'd be happy to talk about those things later, but I don't want to take up the I mean, on a kind of macro scale, what kinds of situations are friendly to statistics, and actually how state statistics, public statistics, vary depending on or relate to political states. And here I'm thinking especially of Alain de Rosière, who is certainly a person you would think of very early if you are interested in history or sociology of statistics, who has a very nice little paper about the relationship between kinds of statistics and political states. And he has, in the most familiar form by that book you mentioned that I co-edited, which is a Cambridge History of Social Science, or Cambridge History of Science and Social Sciences. He got him to write a little thing, which he wrote this quite wonderful thing for us, which was about the 5 forms of statistics. He said, I'm not going to run through them all, but just give you a sense of what they are and how he draws out the political valence of them. And I suppose I'll say at the beginning, it's not like it's a clear, sharp set of distinctions, but you get, in fact, it's a kind of a conceptual breakdown, which is good for thinking about controversies or about disagreements about numbers. And so, and he actually starts with what he calls the engineering state, which is not so far. This is trying to plan with statistics, and what kind of statistics do you need to do that? They tend to be economic, but they involve labor. They certainly involve trying to know the situation you're working with enough that you can manipulate it. So this is a kind of statistics which is for an interventionist state. And there are moments. I'll mention the Second World War, which is not by any means the first. Okay, but that was really, we sometimes call it the economists. I mean, first of all, the physicist war or the economist war, but it's the economist war. It's in large measure the statisticians war, as they're trying to gather up data to reshape an economy in order to take factories that were producing automobiles and instead produce cars and tanks and airplanes or something. So so this this kind of engineering statistics also can extends into a kind of statistics to make socialism, or to socialize economy sufficiently to mobilize the resources to fight a war. So that's I don't want to say the war and socialism are the same thing, but they have in common. But actually, they have in common this ambition to know enough about the economy and to interrelate different aspects of the statistics sufficiently that you can turn a peace economy into a war economy, or can try to make an economy that will serve social needs as however they're being introduced. Desrosiers also mentions the Keynesian state, which is again for intervention, but for the very particular kinds of interventions of macroeconomic management, not really trying to make socialism, but to keep the economy from falling into depression, or to correct that. And then actually, but I'm in this talk on funny numbers, I'm especially interested in another kind, or another ambition for the statistics, which in its extreme form, Desrosiers calls it liberal. I think maybe liberal means the same thing in Australia as it does to him. In the United States, liberal, we think liberal is pushing towards socialism. So you can tell me, I don't know, anyhow, in England, it's generally more, it's really about state intervention, and rather than about individual, or about private enterprise. But well, anyhow, but he says liberal, he means the free market state. And as he actually again frankly recognizing this is an exaggeration, you might be, as a liberal in this sense, as a free market liberal, that you don't want any state statistics at all, because they're going to provide resources and encouragement to try to direct the economy, to redirect the economy, and the best economy is left free. The market should take care of these things, not not economic managers, or not that's not state officials. And that moving along takes us to well, he finishes with the neoliberal state. I suppose we all mean pretty much the same thing by that, which is liberal in the sense of trying to promote a free economy and to harness individual incentives to produce efficient outcomes, but recognizing certain necessary roles for the state, which would involve not just having everything produced freely, but using incentives to get, let's say, private, either I mean, in new public management, to getting bureaucratic actors to behave as if they were efficient, you know, in an efficient market, or perhaps also for legitimate public expenses, to use incentives to guide private enterprise to produce results that are wanted for public purposes. So it's a kind of an intervention, but it's trying to harness the dynamism of the market to produce social desirable social ends. And again, the political ideal is to to harness private initiative for public ends. Now, as I move towards the tricks played with numbers, I want to introduce a kind of the patron saint of neoliberalism. I don't know, well, whatever. Which is Friedrich Hayek, who, in the post-war period felt as if he was a voice in the wilderness, facing, Keynesians and worse, who were trying to move towards socialism, not maybe, well, I mean, actually Hayek also, the road to feudalism sees extremely bad results. But even if you don't think that it's, moving away from a free economy, which is both morally and economically more successful, more desirable, more efficient. And Polanyi, Hayek, in this project, aligned himself with a chemist turned philosopher, Polanyi, not Karl Polanyi, but Michael Polanyi. Karl Polanyi is anyhow, Michael Polanyi, who argued for markets, or really argued about science as local knowledge. So local knowledge, meaning it involves skill that is not easily communicated. It's doesn't travel very easily. You learn it in an apprentice-like relationship. He didn't want to exclude, graduate schools and things like that, but the real heart of the learning would take place in, in somebody's lab. Or actually, we tend to associate this kind of knowledge with laboratory work, but in fact, he emphasized mathematics too. Really depends on that personal knowledge, which you're only going to pick up from a close relationship with a teacher, an expert, your professor, a master who really knows these things. So Polanyi used terms like local knowledge and personal knowledge, and in a way Hayek is arguing that kind of thing as well. And he gave examples, actually, now perhaps this kind of an economy is associated with the whatever, Silicon Valley or something. Hayek talked about like somebody selling, exchanging, newsprint, which might have a higher value in one place than another, or maybe rapidly shifting prices over time. And the state planner, or even indeed a big company, is not going to be able to manage, not going to be able to deal with these changes, efficiently. So the real efficiency comes from harnessing, in fact, not from central planning, but from local people, moved by incentives to, to get high prices and low prices, which is going to move things, quickly to where they're needed when they're needed. That kind of those kinds of incentives, which Hayek insists are very difficult for big institutions and even more so for states, but are really managed well at the level of the local level of what small firms and even individuals who are paying attention and who know what's going on, the minute it happens, rather than waiting to process it through layers and layers of bureaucracy. So, I have to say, in my career as a person moving in circles of history and philosophy and sociology of science, we tended to find local knowledge an appealing concept. It was a way of rethinking science, not supposing that you automatically have universal scientific scientists agreeing on everything, because nature is simple, or nature is potentially simple, so everybody must, we all confront the same nature. In fact, we all confront nature through very different circumstances and with very different backgrounds, and this, was a way of just historicizing science in a more convincing way. Okay, so that's good, but here's actually this tool of of science studies, which are closely related to, Polanyi and Hayek are explaining this also. By the way, Polanyi also insisted on the economic analogy that with personal knowledge, the science can work with something like the efficiency of economic markets. Okay, so that, and I actually find that the whole philosophical perspective quite enticing, and that's to say, plausible and nice insights. As a economic strategy, it might have some trouble in that it's not that easy for if you're not supple enough and you don't have enough contact with the local situation to buy the newsprint or whatever whatever thing you're to conduct these local projects in an efficient way. You may not be in a very good position either to evaluate whether, if they have such an advantage over you as the state, or let's say, as I should say, obviously, another possibility for this is the way of managing a big firm, to make it unbureaucratic by harnessing, using, rewarding those who work most efficiently. So if you don't have the knowledge in the central office, if you don't have the knowledge at the center of political power, if you don't to do this yourself in an efficient way, you may not have the knowledge either to really know whether your agents out there, or the people who are working for you, or the people who have contracted to do this, are doing it efficiently, are doing the right thing either. So I say this is, or even actually to assure the correctness of the numbers. And so, in fact, this is certainly a circumstance for the appearance of what I call funny numbers, which I think you will all recognize. That funny numbers usually means false numbers, but it also, funny is also, the scenes that develop under the rule of funny numbers can be quite funny in a ironical sort of, a sardonic sort of way, as you see them spin out in producing results, or tragic in producing results that weren't what let's say what the central firm, what the state wanted in the first place. So the subcontracting has its virtue, but can you enforce, the use of incentives certainly has its advantages in harnessing local knowledge, but can you manage it sufficiently to get to motivate the agents to do what you actually wanted, or what the state actually wanted, what the firm actually wanted, what the whatever the town actually wanted? Can you manage that kind of that kind of thing. And so actually, again, back to the funny numbers that I'm interested in show up now in all these situations that we are familiar with as we have tried to create incentives for the efficient operation of all kinds of organizations. And I will mention a few that are of particular interest, probably to all of us, since we are engaged in research and education. But I don't know. Anyhow, maybe somebody can fill in some story that's familiar to you and to me. We have the No Child Left Behind Act in the United States. We have PISA, the comparative measurement of school performance. Beginning in Europe, but now all over the world, and ratings of school systems, ratings of universities, ratings of classrooms. I mean, and there are economic. I think this is falling out of favor with econometric style models trying to calculate the value added of a classroom for every teacher in every school so that the assessment of their teachers' performance, as well as the assessment of the students' performance, can be used to move this system forward to produce real efficiency. But how do you measure success of these systems? Well, you give people tests. Let's spend the system, and we don't really. It's not fair if the tests are not sufficiently standardized, or if the grading is not sufficiently automatic. You can't really be confident that it's been done fairly. So it actually directs the educational programs towards particular kinds of testing, which are, well, I mean, this is the whole story here too, but not the same as what. I mean, the testing that can be used to support or to assess the schools is never the same as what the teachers thought was important or the schools thought was important to teach in the first place. So it actually starts out trying to measure the schools, and the schools end up adapting themselves to the measurement that is imposed on them. So again, I mean, the kind of the funny numbers aspect of this is that it's very difficult to maintain the goals you had when you started as you try to use a quantitative system, which is the simplest basis for comparison. But as you try to use a quantitative system to produce quality of whatever it is, such as education, I guess probably most of us are associated with universities, and stories, things like that are rampant in universities as well. We do very well actually Anglophone universities in general do quite well in university rankings. I think it's in many ways forced a single standard, or the kind of pseudo adoption of a single standard of what the university is in order to try to move up in the ratings. And the history or the story of ratings of all kinds of institutions is again characterized by, on the one hand, a real effort to measure to improve, but one that is never, the thing that is being measured is never quite what you wanted it to be, and it is often possible to distort it in ways so it is very far from what you had in mind in the first place. So yeah, so the whole history and sociology of numbers has seen in recent years an increasing interest in asking how systems of measurement do more than measure what they're after, but in fact redefine what they're after here. Yeah, I think I'm just going to I have some more stuff here about which I might say, but that's kind of the way that this trajectory it goes from numbers developed, or statistics developed to provide knowledge at a distance, to statistics used to measure quality and to regulate behavior, to statistics used to support kind of a new economic, to provide incentives to improve performance, but always with the problems of identifying what you measure with what you really were trying to, achieve, and the question which we perhaps even people like me who have the right to be ironical about these things would actually like to see what we can, what numbers should we get rid of, and can we design our numbers in a way so they actually produce or help to produce the outcomes we're looking for. And I think I'll just I'll stop there and welcome your comments and questions.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Ted. Would anyone like to feel free? This is just kind of an open Zoom session, so if anybody would like to chime in and ask a question, feel free. I guess you could also type it into the chat box. Anyone have anything to say immediately? I can get it started if. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah. No need even to raise your hand. Just feel free to jump in. Go ahead, Naomi.
Thank you for your comments. It's interesting to hear your perspective. I'm an accounting professor, and basically you've been justifying all of the things that I've been teaching for the last 30 years, because that's precisely what we look at, is the way that information is reported and what are the strengths and weaknesses of the way that it's reported. And I'm a management accountant, so we think about incentive systems and how you provide measures that provide incentives without resulting in dysfunctionality. So one of the things that we focus on is who is the stakeholder that you're trying to support. And I think inside the firm, in many ways, it's easier because we have a better defined stakeholder. But when you get more in government, in education, I think it gets a little bit more difficult because you've got a diverse population of decision makers that you're trying to support. So do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I agree that it gets harder. I mean, I think I can claim to be the first historian of science to get interested in the history of accounting, which happened. I mean, there's a London School LSE group of accountants whom I got to know, and they invited me out. And I was for 1 week the Arthur Anderson visiting professor of accounting, which sounded pretty good. And then Arthur
and we all know what happened to Arthur Anderson.
Oh well. So there you go. That's what happens it comes from inviting me. Watch yourself. But I did. I mean, I read into it a little bit, and I don't pretend to be seriously expert. But I found accountants and this is in the United States again, whereas they're trying to to settle the role for accountants who are not, I mean, as you know, not just bookkeepers, but there were leaders of the profession who thought that like just preparing these sheets of on standardized forms is nothing, much less than accountants need to be doing. They need to be providing ignorant people, among whom I certainly count myself, who are a sense of what the firm is worth or how it's doing. And the numbers, they didn't think, there were people who didn't think the numbers alone could do that this was an interpretive work. And that somehow the system of regulation, reduced it to, well, I mean, at least in like corporate reports, to forms that look straightforward and simple, but actually in the course of which they often leave out. Well, I don't know, but I also had the experience once of buying a stock because it's, anyhow, well, I won't go into it, but you learn why the numbers there are so, I mean, in fact, the people preparing the numbers knew perfectly well how inaccurate they were, but there was such a regulated business, they weren't allowed to say so. And if they were allowed to say so, they would be subject to endless haranguing and temptation by the companies to make their numbers dishonest anyway. So it was how are you going to, most of us, before we know anything, think, what could be simpler than accounting? But it's not. simple at all, and it's morally charged, and you know, and it's not easy to get you know, the kind of you know, honest you know, advice that people want from these numbers. So.
Well, there is some veracity to them. They aren't completely bunk.
No, I don't mean to.
Just in defense of my profession.
Okay, no, but even in fact, I believe that in you know, in some circumstances, it is impossible for honest, I mean, that is, say, for totally disinterested, honest accountants to in fact record the information in a way that it's transparent to, or that it.
Yeah,
I mean, even transparent, that even it really, that makes it, you know, reasonable to think that a person can interpret the accounts in such a way as to understand, you know, what's going on with the firm, you know. And that doesn't require dishonesty. I mean, it's not that easy to know these things. Also, you know, you're sampling a lot of documents and so on. But even, you know, everything else in it, in fact, has been regulated to try to limit the discretion of accountants to record stuff that they might think is important, but that they don't. Well,
I think that one of the problems is we've got very complex systems that we're trying to summarize with numbers.
Right.
And so that's, you know, that's a very difficult task, and probably impossible to do absolutely perfectly. I mean, impossible to do absolutely perfectly. So the question is, what are the, you know, you have to balance the strengths and weaknesses of the system. So I'm going to stop talking now and let someone else have a turn. Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you. It's completely appropriate. Sociology and history of accounting are very relevant and almost prototypes of the problem.
Well, it's interesting, if I could just chime in there. One of the things you mentioned early on was some of the problems that are occurring in, for example, social psychology, or that are coming to light in that and related areas where there's now this kind of, it's referred to in various ways, but often as a crisis of replicability. They'll talk about it like that, or a crisis of false findings or false discoveries or whatever. And it's been interesting to watch that kind of unfold over the past few years, and some of the potential solutions that social psychologists and others have come up with. And a lot of those are related to what are essentially accounting practices, where the idea is that they're going to overcome their problems, some of which are kind of fundamentally epistemological or ontological, you know, the measurement of kind of fuzzy concepts like attitudes or whatever it is. And, you know, with notions of what is true and false based on kind of simplistic, statistical, null hypothesis, significance testing, or whatever. And then the idea that what they're going to do is resolve some of their issues by being more transparent in their practices. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it's a good idea to be kind of honest, I think, about, you know, kind of the activities of a researcher. But what seems to be occurring now is the idea that through a specific brand of transparency, which is to say, they're going to, as a community, they seem to be trying to collectively come to terms with what they think are the most important features of a scientist's behavior or activity in the process of generating science and scientific results, and then reporting those in some kind of more or less standardized way. So you know, that idea that that you get transparency as a function merely of community agreement on what counts for accounting, I think is going to lead to, obviously, its own new kinds of problems after they realize that all this new particular brand of transparency, in fact, doesn't make their findings any more transportable to new contexts, or, you know, that they seem to be misunderstanding the problem as if it's like an accounting problem. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Accounting problems aren't even just accounting problems. But.
Right, exactly.
Watch
exactly.
it. Watch your use of accounting versus bookkeeping.
Yeah. I mean, so I mean, there are both in medicine and social psychology. One thing that was happening that, you know, should be corrected and could to some degree be corrected was not to make it to disallow conducting an experiment and waiting till you got one that had a result you liked before you published it. So your 5%, you know, it only takes whatever 12 repetitions or something, and you get your 5% on average or something. So, and so and that was, you know, and that produced, you know, some famous psychologists, and then scandalized ones, perhaps, and certainly corrupted the, along with a lot of other things people were doing, corrupted the drug regulation processes. So I mean, actually, though I think that we can count on continued inventiveness on the part of interested actors to find ways to corrupt these measures. I still think it's a good idea, the idea of, you know, requiring a registration of the experiment in advance. It does make it put obstacles in the way of some of the most straightforward, you know, forms of cheating that became quite widespread. So yeah, but then, you know, they're going to, you know, can you shut that down completely? In some level, you kind of depend on, you know, some standards of honesty in the people doing the work. But yeah, so I don't. There are no magic answers, but there are things which are probably worth doing.
Anyone else have a question for Ted? Or a comment? I see Erica, you've chimed in there in the chat. Did you have anything that you wanted to ask? Not to put you on the spot.
I don't know if it's a question. Sorry, I'm muted because the cat's bothering me, but yeah, no, I think the accounting discussion is interesting. It's something that I've worked with in looking at the art market, and in particular, art as a financial investment. Not that I'm for or against. I would never recommend art as an investment to someone, given what I know, but it's a really nice site to think about the complexity of trying to understand how can you have transparency. So for example, as a non-regulated market, you only have auction price data, and you can't get a systematic read of gallery prices, which is about half the market, depending on how you want to slice things. And so some really interesting things happen with the way that people look at auction prices and then think that that's the value. And I guess this is going into away from numbers and more into valuation, as a really nice topic to look at the complexity of our world and quantification. So yeah, more of a comment than a question, but yeah, loving the topic.
And a very nice comment on one of the really fascinating, objects of, difficulty in putting values. I think there are, a lot of investment portfolios, or whatever investors recommend, having 5% or 10% of your money in art. And that produces funny / terrible effects, like all this artwork locked up in warehouses in Switzerland, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I actually went to a little conference in one of these. I don't know whether everybody there was just sheltering their. This was an attempt to open up the investment, art or the art investment sites a little bit. You could go see some of these things in their cages. But, it was nice, but yeah.
Interesting. Well,
because it really does. The financial side is very consequential, I think, also for the production of art.
yes, and I guess one of the things that I thought was interesting is that a price is not a price. That if you look at it, well, it is and it isn't. If you look at an auction price, because the market is so thin, if you look at a price from something at, I don't know, Drouot Auction House in Paris from 5 years ago, and it's in the summer, you can very easily get what the art gallerist would tell me, oh, that's a wrong price. And the economists, you know, like, don't like to hear that term, but that's exactly what the gallerist said. They're like, oh yeah, that's the wrong price. Of course, that kind of challenges a fundamental nature of markets, and well, any achieved price is the right price. But their point was that because you took it into the market at the wrong time in the wrong place, for example, you didn't take this contemporary art to the Sotheby's evening sale in June, that would be kind of the major price setting activity, that should be the right price, that should be what I think of as the right value. But rather it was disposed of at basically a country auction, and some sense of geographical or even temporal price dispersion happening there. So really interesting. And then again, the work that the gallerists do is something like, when they look at comparables, they're adjusting for the season, for the venue, for the, you know, all of those quality of the artwork, but also the quality of the market at the same time. And it's a very interesting kind of site for. Anyway, I'm talking too much. I want to hear more from your work.
That's really great.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for coming. Does anybody have anything, any final thoughts, or before we just
nice
thank
to
Ted?
hear someone from a field we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, that's right. Look, we've got some psychologists here. We've got a few sociologists, and there's some economists as well. Okay, maybe it's 4 weeks of lockdown have exacted a particular kind of toll on the minds, on the hearts and minds of us all. Well, let's pause there. And so I've provided a link here to that chapter by Desrosiers that you mentioned here in the chat. So if anybody wants to download that, that's freely available. And obviously there's additional work by Ted, as well as others on issues like transparency. And you mentioned obviously this kind of UK school of accountants. Is it Michael Powers?
Oh yeah. He's
example.
He's another person from the accounting side. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So so this was originally a business and economics group, and then we obviously expanded far beyond that. So if anybody wants to look at it from that or other perspectives, and then obviously I just can't recommend enough Ted's your excellent work on these topics.
Could I mention? I could mention the Michael Powers, who is looking at also a kind of uses of numbers, and he argues, among other things, that you can't really assess the quality of the number except by assessing the quality of the experts delivering it. So in a way, the push towards rule-bound objective numbers actually leads you straight out into interpretation and expertise, and expertise against and assessing the character of people, which is again another kind of fascinating irony that comes out of of looking at trusted numbers, of looking at wanting to find reliable numbers.
Right. Okay, thank you so much, Ted. I guess we'll stop it there, and I'll put this talk. Yeah, thank you. I'll put this talk online, and then I'll send around a link, and then we can share it afterwards. Obviously, with everybody, it'll be on YouTube. Does that sound good?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.